Hello everyone, and welcome to the 22nd episode of the Knowledge Nest. I am here, Dr. David Chambers.
I am not a doctor.
Oh, you're not a doctor.
Yet.
Okay.
But I have a master's degree in counseling. But
nice.
I'm exploring doctorate programs. Haven't made the jump yet, so got to back off on the doctorate for now.
I have David Chambers. I still refer to everybody as doctor. From the psychology department. He's doing a lot of awesome work. And I've invited him here to talk about mental health and his courses and kind of how he encourages students like you to take advantage of mental health resources, and he actually has new mental health first aid courses that he's offering and doing in conjunction with other people. So we're going to talk about that. So I'll jump right in with the questions. David, tell us a little bit about yourself. What brought you to psychology, that field, and mental health specifically?
You know, I think any student really goes through that process of trying to figure out what they're going to do. I knew that I was working in sort of a construction type field. I wouldn't say it's full construction. It was like we say window siding, rain gutters. I was doing a job in that regard, and I had been there for about 3.5 years, and it was just mundane, too monotonous, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I got to do something more challenging to my brain. It was just too much routine. So I wasn't sure where to go. And I had a conversation with a sibling of mine who's like, well, you're good with people. Why don't you do psychology? And that was the first time I remember going, aha. So I didn't talk to any counselors. I didn't talk to any advisors. I just went to CSI, came here first, and said, I'm declaring psychology. Let's go. Like I had something to put to grab a hold of, so to speak. So I got into psychology that way. Was it the best move? Probably not. I spent my first semester taking classes that had nothing to do with my degree. And what's the problem with that? Any idea?
Well, you're spending your energy, but you're not really going.
Well, I'm taking classes that aren't going to help me get my degree. So the important take-home message: talk to an advisor, talk to the people who are running the program, so you get fast-tracked to being done.
Yes.
That's so an important lesson. But I will say this: the classes I took were still informative and enlightening to me as a human being. So it was really an important process, as much as it might have extended my stay at CSI a little bit. It gave me a broader perspective of what it means to be a college student. So it's okay to have some of those classes that fall outside the realm of what you're going to eventually do, because I feel like it helps you learn more about what's offered on a campus and in the world, really. So but that's what brought me to psychology, was just getting in here, grabbing a hold of it and running, and then eventually talking to an advisor.
Yes. Find out what you're passionate about and talk to an advisor to make sure you're working toward what that is.
First.
Yeah, first. So what is the importance, I guess talking to advisor, reading and research in the context of mental health?
Reading and research in the context of mental health. Can I read that question?
Yes. So I put research into it, but what is the importance of reading in the context of mental health?
Oh, okay. So when you say reading, you had sent me these questions. I don't know if that's okay to say. So I got to look at these questions before I came over here, and I was wondering, did you mean like just reading in relation to how do I feel it supports mental health, or is it important to research it? Like, I just feel like there's a couple angles.
How does reading assist one's mental health, or engaging in any type of communication or language or anything like that?
I guess I can speak from my own perspective in terms of reading. I like to read things, and I like to do physical form. There's a lot of digital media out there, and I do a fair amount of reading digitally, but I like a good old-fashioned book in my hands because it takes me away from all the jargon of the world that's at my fingertips, and it kind of locks me into that specific thing. So I hope that print form books stick around, because I feel like it really gives you a chance to have a psychological break from everything else. I think it's a healthy habit. And I've actually been trying to get better in the last couple of weeks about this. So the different books that I've been reading, I've been trying to make a more dedicated effort to pick them up and read them and put the phone down, go into another room, go outside. And so for me, it's an important exercise to just allow your brain to relax but gain a singular focus on the story you're on, and that can be its own therapy. Like there's a lot of therapy built into the world that we live in when we step back and take a look at it. The habits and the hobbies and the things that we do can really help us or hurt us depending on what they are. So reading in the context of what helps me with mental health is what I just spoke to in terms of understanding mental health. It is a vastly changing world. So it's also, to address that other side of the question I feel was sort of there. to watch how different therapies are emerging and better science is coming out in terms of understanding our brain-body connection. Neuroscience is an area that I study now, but I didn't have a lot of exposure to other than when we talk about the biology connections to our psychology. There's the neuroscience of things are helping us, I feel, find better connections to understanding how we function and why this happens and why that happens and what we can do about it. I hope that made sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No. So. And one of the things you brought up when you talk about research is always changing, kind of with like this, you and I are on a committee for generative AI, and that's always changing. A lot of fields that have to do with sciences are always changing, and so you have to be able to read and to read fast and to kind of get the most important parts, because you never know what could happen tomorrow or the next week or next month.
And the AI rabbit hole right now, my goodness, it's moving at breakneck speed, I feel. But,
yes. Well, the same thing with neuroscience. At least I've in my kind of brief, I like to read about that kind of as a layman. You probably know more about that, but it seems like there's advances all the time and changes in what model you're using or what theories are.
And in the world of psychology, I think that can be confusing to the general public, because psychology being a newer science, it's hard to see somebody say, well, here's our claim now, but then here's our new claim. Mm-hmm. The science is really about doing that, updating that data set, but because of how fast it's going, I think sometimes people misunderstand psychology in general because of those updates. Because it happens so quickly, it's harder to take it as seriously, I think, for some people. But I get it. It is kind of what it is, and we just kind of say, well, here's our best effort right now, and hopefully we get to where it's more substantiated. That's the goal, I think. So.
How did, again, this is a little bit too, how did books or the library affect your psychological development, affect your childhood, your learning?
So an interesting anniversary occurred to me on the way over here. I'll try not to get too emotional about it. 7 years ago to the day, my father was buried. So he passed away, I say broken heart, Mom passed away 2 months prior to that. But we had his funeral on June 26th, 2015. He was a librarian, master of library science from Washington, the University of Washington. He was a Husky. And so I was influenced because, well, my mom and dad were always reading books growing up, and my dad himself being a librarian. Mm-hmm. You know, and watching what he did and how he interacted with it. And so I could say that it had an influence. But what's interesting, and this was an interesting, like I'm being redundant with that statement, it was kind of interesting for me to go, okay, I have this father who's a bookworm, literally does this for a living, worked for the Montana State Library for 25 plus years, and I hated reading. I don't hate reading, but it's the way that I read is unique. I can't just sit down and read a book from front to back cover in one sitting, or it takes me a while. Sometimes there are some books out there that I can sit down and it's done. Mm-hmm. For one, it was coincidentally, since I brought it up, Alex Trebek wrote a book just before he died. Yeah. My wife bought that for me for my birthday. Oh, nice. Alex Trebek died of what my mom died of, so it was kind of this weird connection. She loved Jeopardy, and there was so many good parallels there. That book, during the pandemic, had time to sit down. I read that like in a couple of days. Like when I say a couple of days, it was like a couple of hours spread across a few days, because that's how I read it. But for the most part, though, I have like 7 or 8 books that I'm always reading. Mm-hmm. And so it seems a little bit odd maybe for some, but I'll pick up a book, read a chapter, or I'll pick up a book and read a couple pages, and I just kind of rotate, and eventually I get through these books. So that kind of wandered off from your original question there, because you're asking, what was the influence? Well, I guess I learned that I'm kind of selective with how I read and what I want to do. But I will say that once I got to college, I went from enjoying the occasional pop culture book, things that might be written by, I read a lot of Crichton growing up, Harris, not Steve Harris. That's a guitar player then. No, Richard Harris, right? So Hannibal, Red Dragon, things like that. Anyway, I went from reading those kinds of things to reading textbooks, because that was my world. When I finally got into college and I realized, I became kind of obsessed or intentional with how I read, and I read textbooks. So it's funny, I can pick up a textbook and I can read it quickly because I put a lot of emphasis onto that. And so I find it funny that it takes me so long when I have these pop culture books. It takes me long to read those, but if I get a textbook, it's like I can go quickly with it. It's weird. So anyway, I hope I didn't wander too far from your question.
No. In fact, it's kind of interesting because I felt the same way. I used to read fiction all the time, and now I don't like fiction as much. I do like poetry, but nonfiction textbooks I can read really easily. I still do like fiction, but it takes me longer.
Yeah.
It's interesting how it changes.
Yeah, it just kind of it over the course of my education, I learned when I became an instructor how I don't know. It's you learn the language of textbooks.
Yes.
As a student, and especially through a master's and doctorate program, and even probably through the bachelor's level, just how much time you spend dedicated to studying makes you that much more proficient. So when I teach in my classes now, read and then reread. It's not to make it mundane. It's not to give you a senseless task. It's about getting so good that it becomes so efficient that you don't think about it.
Yeah.
And so you have to appreciate that end result will get there just by the effort you're going to put in, but your motivation has to get you there. And
yes.
So how do I motivate students to feel that? I work on it.
Yes, exactly.
So I can share my experience like I just did. So.
Yeah, well, that's really awesome. And that's really interesting. I'm focusing on like researching and helping students find textbooks, but reading them, that's a really interesting skill. To that point about helping students, how do you encourage mental health in your general courses?
Yeah, well, there's a few aspects that I actually target, and it's been an evolution of sorts since I've been teaching. One of the things that I've done, especially in the last year and a half, is just trying to be more upfront with students where they're at. Mm-hmm. Giving, to me, I came from, I learned to be an instructor based on all the instructors I had. And there's some common things that I liked, some common things I didn't like. And so I initially started out as an instructor to being like, I want to design a course that I would want to take if I was a student, right? Yeah. So that's just me saying, here are all the pieces from all the teachers I had, and here's what I would want to do. Mm-hmm. And that's great. I think students like that. Because when I'm transparent about that, I think it helps them understand, oh, he's thinking of us in a very selfish way, because it was really guided for me. But more importantly, I want, part of the attitude that I learned through various experiences as a student was that your instructor has to be rigid, has to be very hardcore to deadlines and timelines, is going to care but not concern themselves over your personal life. And so those things, for whatever reason, I initially started off with going, okay, that's how a teacher is. And I quickly realized that it just didn't feel right to me to do that. So to be more inviting to the conversation, and also to trust students more. Because I came in as an instructor not trusting as much, like you're a student and all you want to do is cheat your way through my class. What? How did I pick that up as to have an attitude towards my students? It doesn't send the right message if that's your cognitive bias, that you just are assuming that students are there to cheat. And so to give students the benefit of the doubt. So it's sort of a covert approach to being more transparent and collaborative with my students, because ultimately, especially in the last year and a half, I've adopted some other strategies to kind of help them understand I'm here to meet you where you're at, but also to help you have a structure to work through this content. Yeah. And so asking, I kind of frame my class now in that, look, you have life. You have relationships, you have jobs, you might have children, you might have elderly parents, you have all of these things going on in your life. And one day you decided to add school to that mix. So that's where I start with students now. I say, look, your mental health is already taxed. And in today's day, in the last couple of years, the way that the job market has stretched everybody thin. We can't seem to find people to fill various spots, or I've got 2 different jobs, I'm filling multiple shifts, and I'm even a high school junior, right? So our time and effort cognitively, physically, or mentally and physically is being stretched in all these different directions, more so than I even remember being as a student 20 years ago. And so trying to help students recognize and trying to help them understand that I recognize that this is where we're at. you through school onto this mix. And the first sign of danger, which means I'm stressed out from missing a deadline or my grade starts to lower, I'm ready to jump ship. Where am I going to jump ship from? My education. What's the least needed? Because I still have a job, I can still get paid, I got to put food on the table, I've got to, got a car payment or whatever it is. And so even though there's time and investment, I want students to know that this can be worked through, and that at least in my classes, my approach is trying to get them to work through those hurdles as much as possible without being an enabler, but helping them understand that it's a process. You wanted to do this for some reason. Let me help you find that success. Anyway, so there are those approaches that I take. In terms of there was more to the question though. You said, how do I help students promote mental health? Yes. So this was all. That's sort of my classroom atmosphere, my attitude towards my students and how I've changed. Currently, though, I try to talk to them about accessing the resources they have in the community if they aren't already accessing them. A lot of students don't have access or aren't aware of the access to what they have here at CSI through our Better Minds program, so they can have counseling with. Some students aren't a big fan of, say, remote, like having a Skype session counselor, having counseled students through that medium. It was actually much more pleasant than I had expected. I wasn't sure what to do, how I'd feel. When the pandemic hit, we recognized that we're going to have more remote services. I got a bunch of trainings on, what are the, what would you say, confidentiality concerns and limitations with technology when you do counseling through a screen. It was actually quite informative, and then I jumped into the counseling center here and I worked with some students, and it was a very pleasant experience. And so I can share with my students that have that concern what my perception was, and to encourage them to give it a try. And so helping them access the counseling services here. I've walked students over to the counseling services. I have cards outside my office. I've noticed that promotion in my own office building has shown up. There's if you go to the Hepler building, you're going to see the cards for Better Minds for students hanging outside of our main office. There's a mental health board in there that has cards. There's cards outside my office, and other people are starting to hold those. So trying to make sure that we have access and awareness of these services. Students, I had a student in a class just last spring say, they heard what I had to say about it in class. They came up and grabbed a card after class from me, and they started the counseling. And they self-disclosed to the class that had it not been for that, they might have dropped out of school. And so I try to help students meet the class as much as they can within certain, I feel like I'm rambling, but to the mental health aspect, to just kind of pull this all together here, the classroom atmosphere and expectations are not negotiable to the point that it enables students, but it allows them to feel confident and more autonomous in that process. So hopefully that increases their motivation for class, but also an open conversation about mental health, understanding how to access it, what my limitations are as their instructor. Even though I'm a licensed counselor, I can't be there. So we just have that conversation. But I have a lot of students, or I've had a lot of students over the years, find comfort in the instructor having those qualifications and taking the time to hang out after class to ask for those services. So anyway, so there's a lot involved. If you couldn't tell, I can ramble on and on and on.
No, but this is very good. In fact, the first thing we're going to do, we have a LibGuides page on the library, help resources, and has a lot of mental health resources. And do we have the Better Minds link up on there? If we don't, I'll do that. The first thing
I would double check. The Better Minds link is really directed through the counseling department. Okay. And so to get involved with Better Minds, you have to talk with an assessor, basically. Ryan Zaccone, my understanding, is the assessor. And so you meet with Ryan and talk about what your needs are, and then you get credits for counseling services. And what's really cool about it is you can do this. You can do it here. They have rooms dedicated. You can sit down at a computer, and they have everything that you'll need. You can do it on your phone. When you're maybe at home, over a weekend. The availability of counselors, I think, has improved, because before it was like you could only get your counseling during the time that CSI was open. Okay. So we've had several holidays. Mondays are closed, and it's like, well, what if I need my service? Yeah. In this case, depending on the availability of the counselor you choose, you might be able to do those things on a weekend, after hours, things like that. So I feel like it's more accommodating to a student's need because of that type of flexibility. Plus, we have huge numbers of rural students across the state, right? So whether it's dual credit, of course, you need to, I believe you have to be 18 or older with the service. There's a liability there. But anyway.
Yeah. So, but the Better Minds program at the Hepworth building, they have the cards. So they have
well, in the Hepworth building, that's just where my office is. The actual counseling office is in the Taylor building, the Taylor Student Union building. Okay. And it's on the second floor. Okay.
So yes, Taylor building, second floor, Better Minds program. That's a very awesome, wonderful resource. I have a question here. How do you assess mental health? If you want to share about that, or if you don't want to.
So assessing mental health is kind of it's kind of I don't want to say tricky. It's an interesting process. We're all assessing our mental health, whether we call it. Some people don't like the word mental health or psychological issues. They don't want diagnosis, but we're all sort of checking in on ourselves. Like, how do I feel? What am I going through? What does this mean? We all have our own histories, and so it's very, very common for us to go to the interweb or the internet, if you will.
Yes.
This is my symptom. What is this called? What am I going through? And so assessment really starts with the self, and I think the best thing that I could encourage anybody to do is yes, acknowledge that you're having those feelings and you want to find answers. The problem with the internet search is that it sometimes could lead us into a rabbit hole of self-fulfilling prophecy that it's worse than it really is.
Yes.
And so it's best to get a third party involved, a counselor, a professional trained to talk about those symptoms, to give you that more objective, because that person is trained to be more objective about what you're going through than you are. Although subjectively, who's more objective? I am. But that's just how our thoughts and minds can get clouded. When we talk about psychological health, it's really easy to go into those, to fall into that rabbit hole and unintentionally despair ourselves. And so getting the right kind of conversation going with the counselor is helpful. And another piece to counseling, though, is sometimes you're going to run to that counselor you just don't feel that connection with, or they're going to say something, and depending on your frame of mind, it just comes up, rubs you raw. You don't want to go back, and it's not a fun experience. So you're a shopper of a service, and so remember to try again. And if you don't think it's working with that counselor, here's how I feel I was trained. If you were my client and you didn't feel like it was working with me. Now, this would rarely happen. It's happened a couple times with me, with some clients. And I was proud of the client for saying this, but I'd be like, I don't want to be a barrier to you getting the recovery you need. And if you don't feel like it's working, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you need a different situation or setup, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm going to help you. And, sometimes I think counselors have sent a message, or people have perceived counselors as being, well, you don't like me. I'm doing just fine, and you're it's like it's kind of this weird dynamic. So ultimately, I hope that your experience in counseling is positive. But if you don't feel like it's working, it's a service. You have the right to go find a different counselor if you need to, which in itself can be a battle with psychological distress. Because what if it took you all your time and effort to get to that door in the first place? So there can be a little bit of a hurdle with those scenarios, but it's not impossible. Okay.
Yeah. No, and it's definitely worth it. I've taken advantage of some mental health resources in the past, and because your mental health can be very fluid. It can change, from day to day with your circumstances, and having those resources there was very helpful to make sure that I was making constructive, productive decisions. And so it was very, very helpful.
It was even helpful for me when I was in grad school. I went to counseling at Idaho State University. It was really useful to have that resource, and it can be preventative. And I'll just say this too: a lot of times we'll go to counseling as a reaction, and we should still do that.
Yeah.
But it can also be preventative. So I tell students at the beginning of the semester, you don't have to wait.
Yeah.
You can get the process started now.
Yeah.
And you're already there, right? And so it can be. And I'd like to see better support for the preventative side of it, like.
Yes. So. And it is kind of interesting. If you only, it's kind of like, like going to the doctor, for your physical health, if you just go to the doctor when you have, an emergency, then they don't get the full holistic picture and you don't get the full holistic treatment. But if you go for your yearly physical or your 6 months physical and they get a more holistic picture, they can help you even when you're in crisis because they know what your regular health is like.
Right.
Kind of the
That's
same
a great
thing.
analogy. Yeah, that's a great perspective.
So on that note, you have a mental first aid course, a mental health first aid course that you're offering. Is this kind of a QPR thing, or is this something else?
QPR is cool, but it's not QPR. But there's some overlap.
Okay.
And I didn't even know QPR existed until March of this year at a conference I was at. They introduced me to it, and I was like, whoa! And I had just gotten certified as a mental health first aid trainer in January of this year.
Okay.
Mental health first aid is like QPR, the CPR, like it's meant to be preventative, but also supportive when we need to react to mental health crisis. Mm-hmm. And so it's just a one-day training basically that helps us learn to be. What I feel it does is it helps us find better confidence to know what to do and how to do it, because we've come from this world of mental health like it's taboo, we shouldn't talk about it, and we're starting to turn the tables. And so that's what this program is really about, helping us find the right things to say. And I can't tell you, even since January, people have come and like, I don't even know what to say to this.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, let's talk about it. And this isn't like a client, this is colleagues and friends and family. Like, what do you do with that information? Mm-hmm. And so this kind of program, and it's evidence-based, is meant to help us improve our confidence of know-how when we find ourselves in psychological crisis or somebody else that we know. It actually comes from Australia. Like I said, I don't want to overemphasize evidence-based, which I think is really cool. And CSI has 4 trainers now.
Okay.
And so we are starting. We have. I'm the one. I think I'm the lone faculty representative trainer. But we have Jamie Teague, who pioneered bringing us here. Mm-hmm. I jumped on board, and then we have our student affairs president and vice president who are trained too, which I think is really cool. So they just got certified, and so we're going to be doing these programs for faculty, staff, and students in certain ways. Okay. The program that we have does require an 18 or older, so if we have students that come here from 17 and they're only 17 or younger, they're not going to be able to take the program. Mm-hmm. But hopefully we can mitigate that by just having enough students who are able to be intermingled with our student body and our faculty and staff that it becomes a non-issue, because that conversation and communication can happen. Mm-hmm. So it can have a trickle-down effect, if you will. Mm-hmm. So those opportunities will be coming up periodically. I think we have our next training on August 10th for faculty. It'll be my second time doing it. And I got to get a third one in before the end of the year, so more on that as it comes up.
Okay,
so.
Yeah. I was going to take one of the sessions, but then I had to go to a conference, and it was like, dang it, I can't be here, so I'll have to go to the third one, I guess.
Yeah.
So what are some things you wish you would have known as a student coming to college?
This is, I think, there was only a couple of questions that made me go, I'm not sure how to answer that. Uh-huh. I didn't know what to expect. I guess there is something. So I had an attitude against CSI. Sorry, CSI, you now employ me. I went to a local rural school, and I graduated with 22 people. Mm-hmm. And somewhere in that process, I built up an attitude that going to CSI was uncool. It's the place where you only go if you can't go somewhere else. And so I thought about it, and for a few months after I graduated high school, I thought, well, maybe I should go give it a try. Mm-hmm. So I came here. I actually talked to an advisor, an entrance counselor, as they were. Did not have a good experience with that. I left that conversation feeling like I am not equipped to become a college student, and I had no right being here. Oh, wow. 15 minutes is what and it was a damning conversation, if you can excuse my phrase. Mm-hmm. I then went to this job that I had for 4 years. I think I mentioned that earlier. Mm-hmm. And it just bugged me. And it finally stewed on me like, well, I'm not going to get any help from anybody. So I'm just going to have to forge my way into it. So I just kind of started taking my lunch breaks, coming over here and getting paperwork done and filling out FAFSA and what is this, what is that. And I just kind of had to bull my way into the system is how I felt. Mm-hmm. So when I got to class, and that's where I was, this is... to answer that question, it was a life changing reality. Like I sat down and I realized, and I felt kind of bad. I don't look back and I don't, you can't change what happened. But I sat in that class and it was, I remember it was all my classes really. But I sat in these classes going, I can't believe I put this off for 4.5 years. I wanted to be here so bad. I just didn't know it. I had an amazing first semester. I soared through my classes. Like it was, pardon the expression.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with education, and I became more involved. I got in student government, and but what I wanted to know differently was just that it would have been that experience. Like I wish I would have known it was that.
Okay. Nice.
That's a really long-winded answer.
No, that's a perfect answer. This is going to be like CSI promotional material type stuff, and that's what we're doing here. So what advice, I guess, and I know you've kind of talked to this a little bit about here, what advice do you have for students who come into the college or the library who haven't been there before? Maybe you haven't gone, taken education or there are things like that.
I say this every semester somewhere to my students, and you know about these resources. I utilized the library resources as much as I could. They had just installed the computer labs in that center aisle out there, and I really like these little cubicles. I'm a little bit big for them now. Well, I was big then, but these cubicles here are cool, and that's new since I was in here just 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Sorry, that made me sound really bad. I've been in here in the last 2 years ago. I came in here; they weren't here. I've been in here since then. I don't know why I said that. Anyway, studying in a distracted world can be really challenging. And where I found value as a student, and students I still believe can find value today, I saw students out there utilizing these things. There are rooms that you can request, that you can get to lock out the rest of the world. You have a computer if you need it, but you can effectively study in a quiet place away from the noise. And I did that with the support of my wife at home once we got to my bachelor's program at ISU, because I knew these resources existed here. Other campuses are going to have similar resources. So if you can start to engage the things that we have here on this campus, you're going to find equivalent types of services at your later educational stomping grounds. And that was really beneficial to me. So studying with groups or studying in isolation, having the computer lab here, the books though, the physical form books are still helpful. There's something about, yes, the internet can provide us lots of great digital media and digital resources, but there's something about like, well, this is in a book and it's right here, we can still find it. So really love where I feared the library was being washed away with the internet, but I think it's become even more relevant to today because of the eclectic mix, if you will, of books, digital media, whatever. The resources have just gotten better, I think. So
yeah, no, it was kind of interesting because when I first went to the library as a kid, they had books and they had audio cassettes. And I remember when we first got the DVDs in at the public library, it was like amazing. Like, oh my goodness, we have DVDs now. And now we have DVDs, we have audiobooks on the little Playway things, we have digital resources. It's amazing. And a lot of them reference each other, and just because there's digital things doesn't mean that the physical items are that's important. I mean, right here, like you said, I have my Kindle here and I have Wicked by Gregory Maguire. Physical books are really important. You have to take advantage of everything. I have books over there on that wall too.
Like I was saying, to me, a physical book in any form gets you away from all that digital stuff, and kind of, for me, and I hope for others, I'm sure feel this way. When you get into the right mindset and the motivation's in the right place to just read, it's sort of a restorative process to the all the stuff that's going on at our fingertips. So. Yeah, I think it helps.
It does. Let's see. What? And this is interesting. And what book or information resource have you given most as a gift, and why? Or if you haven't, what book would you give? Do you have an answer to that question?
So I have not given any books out, but I have had many books come across my thing. And I actually need to do some investigation and get some money and resources, because the books that I like, I think could be very beneficial, because I'll tell my students about it. But it's like, I'd like to just be able to have some sort of event where I've got a case of these books and I can hand them out. I actually wrote down a whole bunch of things.
Oh, wow.
So since
we'll combine this with kind of like the most important books in your life, and what books have had significant impact on your life?
These are books that inspire me, and I think I don't know if this also leans into the other question, like what has inspired me. So these are those, because they've inspired me, I would want them to inspire others. But and this is just a small, what would you say, selection. If I were to give students books, I'd love to be able to say, oh, read this book. It's Incognito. It's about how our brain is doing stuff behind the scenes without our awareness. It's by Dr. David Eagleman. He's a neuroscientist. I'm in the middle of reading that one. It's one of those books that I'll pick up and I'll read a few pages and I'll put it down. A lot of times I'll read these books inspired to go to class and do some sort of example. In fact, from that book, I now teach my students how to flip a coin to make a decision if they're having a hard time based on what they really want. But we think, well, if I flip a coin, I'll just choose what the coin tells me. No, that's not the trick. And that book can tell you where to take it from there. Or you can come take my class. Students kind of go away from that instruction going, holy crap, that's amazing. So to help you make a decision that's more likely to be the decision you wanted, you can use a coin toss to do it. Useful Delusions is one I'm getting close to being done with. Shankar Vedantam, he actually has a podcast called Hidden Brain. And he wrote a book with a guy named Bill, I don't know if it's Bill, but Mr. Mesler and Vedantam. Again, how we sometimes need to lie to ourselves in order to make it through certain things. So it's a really cool book. Again, I read a page on that and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to go talk to somebody about this. There's a book that I thought was going to be for instructors, but it's really written for students. And it's called Outsmart Your Brain. It's by a PhD, Harvard, I think it's Harvard. Dr. Willingham wrote it. And it's really about, hey, here's all the psychological tricks to being the best student you can be. And it's an easy read. Anyway, if I were to have, I wish I had loads of these books to be like, hey, I just want to, like, it's just cool. You don't have to like it, but if you wanted a copy, read this. You might find something that pulls you into that zone of what you need to push forward. As a faculty member, I actually had somebody gift me a book. Matt Reynolds is a sociology instructor here. He came back from a conference and goes, here. And he hands me this book. It's called Make It Stick, The Science of Learning. And it's by Brown, Roediger, and McDaniel. And that book is one of those books that got me sucked in, and I was turning pages. Because you can go to the textbook and read all the jargon in a way that is, textbooks have, I think, a notorious history of just kind of being boring.
Yeah.
But this is taking a lot of the research that I teach in the classes that I've had, and it's putting it in a fun way, like for me. Now, it's not that I wouldn't give it to a student, but for faculty to kind of say, okay, well, here's what I do as a faculty member. Whatever I'm teaching, here are some things that I could take and maybe convert and own it in my own way. And that's what I love about a lot of the books that inspire me now is this is what they did, and I like the challenge of going, how do I take this and go in my own way with it? And so I find a lot of inspiration from that. One book another book is called Super Courses by Ken Bain. But anyway, I can go on and on. There's one more book on the list, but it's in general. When I bring this up in class, I always see 2 or 3 students writing down the book. It's called Nobody's Normal. How I think it says how society has shaped mental health stigma by a guy named Grinker. He's a cultural anthropologist whose father and grandfather were psychiatrists. And his grandfather was actually a client of Sigmund Freud of psychology fame. So he was in Europe and actually was psychoanalyzed by Freud towards the end of Freud's career. So it's a really interesting book, and it's taught me things that I didn't even know that wasn't taught to me in a way that in the field of psychology, it's not anybody's fault. I just think that it's okay to be a little bit more transparent about some things. And so this big manual we use to diagnose, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, comes from the military. It was initially Medical 403, according to that. And I had to fact check. I'm like, he's got, in his book, he's got, a bibliography or the references for all of his work. But I still had to go kind of research, like, is this real? How did I never learn that? The military had this after World War II, initiated by Truman. The National Institute of Mental Health was a Truman initiative at the end of World War II.
Interesting.
It's a major organization to this day. I've gotten a lot of great resources from the NIH, National Institute of Health and National Institute of Mental Health. Anyway, so there was just some cool things in that, but people are desiring to understand, and that's why I think Rinker did a good job with this book. And it's a little bit more of a thicker read, but people are really much, is that English? Are wanting to find information to understand what happened. Why do we have such an attitude towards mental health the way that we do? And more importantly, how do we uncover that? How do we get away from that? So I think this book so far, I'm not done with it, has provided some insights for that. So Nobody's Normal, Rinker.
Okay, awesome. I will definitely look for that book too. Yes, thank you very much, David, for coming here.
Sorry, I took up all. I know there's more questions, but
no, that's good. I guess one last question, and this is kind of probably one of the confusing ones. What knowledge do you use to build your nest? Meaning, what is the knowledge that you kind of base like the central philosophy or knowledge that you have in your life?
Humility.
Okay.
I want to be more open-minded, and I'm very human. Like, I get kind of stuck in a zone, and I have to work to break free of being fixated on any one thing. So I've tried to be better about being more understanding.
Okay.
And that's mostly rooted in those moments that I unfortunately can remember where I was not being as open-minded, because ultimately I feel like I have the best way to grow in my life by slowing down, sometimes taking a step aside, taking a look at the bigger picture, and considering the potential. And so for me, it's just sit, listen, reflect, understand, very philosophical, if you will. So that's kind of what drives me. Okay. I'm not great at it, I don't think, but I try.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and by trying, you do a ton of things. The mental health first aid, all of these different things, the books. I think you're receptive to a lot of the ideas because you work at being open-minded. Like, it seems like you have like 7 or 8. If you read 7 or 8 books at one time, that's a lot to take in. You know.
They're all usually related in the content, though. Incognito is a psychology book in terms of anyway, I don't need to go on, but I'm trying to be, I could be more graceful in response to what you're saying is what I'm recognizing. So I started to get on the fence, like, wait, what?
No, that's good. That's awesome.
I appreciate it.
Guys, thank you for agreeing to come out and in the midst of your busy day. And yes, thank you for listening. This has been an awesome interview. In July, we're going to have the next book review club, and it's going to be on a novel called The Maid. Allison has sent out some things, and Reba sent out some things, so please participate in that, and I will see you next week on The Knowledge Nest.
Be well, stay awesome.
Yes, exactly. Be well, stay awesome.